and welcome to Logan Sounds Off, where I talk about books, music, and a whole lot more. I'm your host, Logan Kelly. Hello and welcome to Logan Sounds Off. Today I'm interviewing the one and only Ian MacKaye. How are you, Ian?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I'm really excited. So for those who don't know you or aren't familiar with straight edge punk, could you explain to the viewers what that is?
I could, but I have to say that first off, let me put it this way. In 1980, I wrote a song called Straight Edge, and I coined the phrase straight edge. But the song that I wrote was a song that was about an individual to have the right they have to choose how he or she wants to live their lives. So it was never about a movement, and it was never a brand. It was not something that I was trying to promote as like something that people should join. It was actually about encouraging kids, mostly because I was a kid, but as I've gotten older, I mean, it extends to everybody, that each of us should be able to decide what's right for us. And you can see the conflict because later when I wrote the song Straight Edge came out and people heard it, the first resistance that we ran into was with people who identified as against straight edge. So they had a movement called bent edge movement or the various anti-straight edge movements, but there was no straight edge movement at the time. It was just one of the songs. I was in a punk band called Minor Threat, and one of our songs was called Straight Edge. We had, 20 plus songs, and there was a lot of things that I was singing about, not just my decision about how I wanted to live. And in later years, people who picked up on it, it became more of a codified movement, and people started referring to it as a movement and something you would join. And with all movements, there were elements, and there were just a few, but there were elements that got confused with being armies, and they started to then inflict their philosophy on people. They started to attack people who didn't agree with them or they felt weren't living properly. That is actually completely contrary to what the song was about. The song was about a person deciding how he or she wants to live, and it's their right to do that. This song was written because in the 1970s, when I was a kid, probably when I was 12 years old, some of my friends started getting high and drinking. And then all through my teenage years, it just became more ubiquitous. People became increasingly more, everyone just got high or drank, or, in high school, it was pretty common. It was actually de rigueur. Everybody did it. And I was ridiculed as a kid. And in high school, people made fun of me because I never drank. I just didn't drink. And I didn't smoke cigarettes. I didn't use drugs. And I was kind of ridiculed. Or sometimes people would say, "Oh, you're making us feel weird because you're not doing this." It was pure pressure, right? But I wasn't kidding around because that's the decision I made in my life. And it's a decision I've made my whole life. So that kind of pressure that I felt, I really resisted. And that's what the song is about, is that resistance. So you can see why I would take issue with people who then, calling themselves straight edge, would then put pressure on other people to do as they say. It doesn't, that's not my intention. Do I think people should drink? No, I don't. I don't think that, but not because I think they're wrong. It's just because I think it's not good for you. That's what I think. I don't think that they're wrong. People are wrong. If someone drinks, I don't hate them. I don't have it's their lives. They can do what they want to do. I mean, mostly in my life, I've certainly seen an enormous amount of damage as a result of substance abuse. And I think that's what I was trying to write about. Do you follow me?
Yeah, I do.
So this idea of
Yeah.
straight edge punk, I don't even know what that is. Like when you ask that question, I don't really know because like I come from I just came into punk. That's where I was coming from. And the idea and what punk means for me, and I should just say this because I think that people talk about punk a lot, but the definition of punk is a little tricky, right? Um, Here's my definition. For me, punk it could be a sound or a music. It could be a look or a fashion. Uh, it could be a philosophy or an attitude. That's
Yeah.
possible. But ultimately, for me, what punk represents is the free space. And what I mean by that is that a place where new ideas can be presented um, without having to kowtow to the profit motive. So when you think about, say, venues, um, when venues have bands, just about music, when venues have bands come play, the people who come see that band, uh, the audience, as we would call them, right, for a band, but for a venue, which has a bar or then they would consider that the clientele, right? They're the people who are coming to buy something. And the music is being used as a magnet to pull people into that room. Um, so they want a full room because that means there's more customers for what they're selling, which is usually in a bar or a pub, beer or alcohol, whatever. There's nothing evil about it. It's just that's just the way that structure is set up. But one of the things about one of the problems is that new ideas don't have audiences because they haven't been thought of yet. So they're not, so being in a commercial venue that requires an audience, they're going to always hire bands that are either established names or established genres. Or maybe maybe somebody from the band was in another band. There has to be some reason that the band will draw. And if that's the case, then music will never progress. Art will never progress. Humanity will never progress because we don't have the new ideas. But for me, punk was a place where people were like, we want to see what's new. We want new ideas. We want to be confronted with new thinking. So they would gather in garages or basements or halls or wherever. They would just come to see what they were doing. And it was, for me, that's what's interesting about what I consider punk. Now, I can't say that is the definition of punk for the world. That's just the definition of punk for me. You follow me?
Yeah.
Right. So the concept of a straight edge punk thing, that's kind of that I would say is a kind of a commercial genre, like an idea that and there are people who might refer themselves like, we're straight edge punk. That's fine. That's totally cool. That's just not how I look at things. I'm not mad at anybody about it. And I also want to say one other thing about straight edge as a movement.
Yeah.
I would say that 99% of the people over the years that I've met who identify as or with straight edge are just trying to do right by themselves or by the world. Now, there's a very tiny percentage of people who identify as or with straight edge who have issues with violence or power, and they're using this structure to inflict violence on the people or to try to gain some kind of power. Unfortunately, in our societies, um, you know, uh, as they say, if it bleeds, it leads, and that's what people pay attention to. Is the violence always gets the attention. If you and I were to go to a picnic, and there's 30 people at this picnic, and 28 of the people are having fascinating conversations, maybe really illuminating conversations. If two people get into a fist fight, that's all we're going to talk about for the next day, right? That's just the nature. That's the nature of our society. So, unfortunately, for people often will say, "Oh, straight edge people are so aggressive, or they're fundamentalists or intolerant." Not true. I don't think that's true. But there are some people who are aggressive and violent and intolerant who have used the concept of straight edge to further those issues for themselves, to further that kind of behavior.
That is an amazing point and a brilliant opening answer. I really appreciate that. And even when you were asking, are you following? I was listening to all of that, and it really made a statement about how you don't really see straight edge punk as straight edge punk. I thought that was a brilliant point. So my first question for you, I want to start way at the start, about when you first kind of got into music, if that's what happened with you. Was there any song, because there was a song for me called 1 Inch Man by Caius, but was there any song for you that you went, whoa, what's this?
Are you talking about like music period or punk?
Music period, anything.
I mean, the Beatles, when I first heard the Beatles as a kid, I was pretty blown away. But actually, there was a song when I was maybe, I'm going to guess 4 or 5 years old. There was a song called Last Date by, God damn it. People ask me this question. I always forget who wrote this song. It may come to me, but Lloyd Kramer, that's who it is. And it's a kind of a jazzy piano thing. But when I was very young, my parents had it's called a Grundig turntable. It's like a console with a turntable on it. And they had a few singles, one of which was this Last Date by Floyd Kramer. And I would just play it over and over and over. I was just obsessed with this song, the way it sounded. I don't know why. It just was the first song I remember really being obsessed with. Then, obviously the Beatles, there's a number of Beatles songs that I really pretty obsessed with. And Hey Joe by Jimi Hendrix, his version of Hey Joe was also really super important to me. And then over the years, it's just been a steady stream of bands or songs that have really, and it continues to this day, where I find a song and I just start studying it. I can't stop listening to it because I'm so interested in, first off, how it affects me, and then thinking about the structure and why it affects me this way, or what it's referencing, or is it the words or the music? It's all very interesting for me. But I've been studying music for, almost 50, I guess, 50 years now. So
That's crazy. Wow. And you were saying there that there was a lot of music that you were saying with the Beatles, but then you went to that one song. You were surrounded by a lot of music, not only in your house, but living in Washington, D.C., you were surrounded by tons of music. So growing up, how was the scene as a whole, and how did it change?
Well, when I was growing up, there was no punk scene here at all. There was no scene. In fact, it's funny you would say that. I mean, I guess, do you live in a rural area?
I live.
Where do you live?
I live in Ireland, so I live in Kildare, which is pretty near to Dublin, which is the capital city.
Yeah, I played there. I've been to Ireland many times, but yeah.
Actually, there's a question coming up about that. So
all right, well, so so I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I have to say music was not all around me. There was radio, of course. I could listen to the radio. My parents were not, my mom had some records, but we didn't do a lot of listening to music. I did. I got obsessed with it. I started playing piano. I don't remember a time in my life where I didn't play piano. I just taught myself how to play very simply, not great, just simple. And I still play basically the same way that I've always played. I can't read. I just something about organizing the sound, the vibration to the sound. It's very easy for me to do. And so piano was I've just always have been interested, but not my other siblings to begin with, they were never really as musical, or it's just something about I don't know what it was about it that it struck me so intensely. Now, it's true that in the 60s, when I was born in 1962. So in the 60s, music was very much connected with the sort of social change that was going on in society. Like the society was was going through this great transformation. Obviously, the civil rights movement was in full bloom. The anti-war movement was happening. The Vietnam War, people were very opposed to that, at least in where I lived. And women's rights, gay rights. So there was this underground, all this sort of rebelling against the straight society, mainstream society, and music was very central to that. So as I was getting older, I was aware of this sort of revolutionary component of music, and it made me, it was very attractive to me because it felt like music was supposed to challenge conventional thinking. Music was supposed to be something that made people stop and think. That's what I thought to me, that's what it was about. By the 70s, mainstream music was not doing that. There was some good rock and roll, Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin, and I liked rock and roll, and I liked heavy funk like Parliament and Lakeside and the Gap Band, and I liked I liked that music, but it didn't feel like it was challenging mainstream thinking. It wasn't. It was just sort of, mostly it was just people were getting rich or getting laid or getting high, and that was not. While the music was nice sounding, it didn't really speak to me, and it was just depressing because I really did associate it with changing the world music. That's what I thought music was for. So when I came across punk in the late 70s, this would have been late 78 when I really first listened to it. At first, it sounded terrible to me. I didn't understand it. And I just thought it seemed dumb. But then I think the penny dropped, and I thought, oh, like when I actually started talking to people, I said, these people are challenging conventional thinking. And this is the environment that I want to be in for the rest of my life. Because that's, to me, what music is supposed to do. It's supposed to constantly get people to stop and look at the world again. Because if you don't look at the world again, you end up just getting folded into the madness. So you got to stop and look around and go, like, this is not right. This is right. This is whatever. Just you have to take inventory of the situation. Otherwise, we just go through, and then terrible things get done to other human beings in our name.
That's really interesting, where you're saying that even though there was music there, it wasn't kind of, yeah, that's actually brilliant. And one band that I really like is I know you love this band, DOA. You were saying in an interview at Nardwar in 2020 that you really love DOA. And I think they always challenge me thinking about, God, I never knew that happened. So there's so many bands like that that are exposed to a lot of people now, but that wasn't the same back then. And you said also,
but to be fair, it's not just politics. So sometimes, like for instance, the Beatles would write songs that would have phrases that were, maybe like a glass onion, or or they'd say, come together right now over me, and you're like, what does it mean? It really made my brain have to stretch. And it's not only about, though DOA was a great band, and their lyrics were very political, and spoke in a very spoke to the injustices of the world and stuff. That was amazing. But that's not the only kind of stretching we're looking to do. We're also looking for people to kind of open our minds. It's like poetry in a way, it's to think about the world around us differently. So I think there's sometimes, I don't want to say that I don't only like political music, that's for sure. Sometimes political music becomes weird because they're just going to keep singing about all the injustice, and then at some point you're like, well, at what point are you happy? Like, what happened? How do you get past this? There's never be an end of injustice in the world. So at what point, like, what do we do here? So I think that sometimes just hearing other bands, a band like, for instance, the Cramps, very important band for me, but they were not a political band lyrically, but they were, those early Cramps records and their approach to the way they were playing and their commitment to their art was profound. And that's the first punk band I ever saw, and it just completely blew my mind.
Yeah. Now, by the way, I just want to put out there when I was saying DOA,
Yeah.
I didn't mean, I was just using that as an example. I know they are very political though. But actually, you mentioned in an interview about how to be a punk, you had to go to New York. Could
That's what
you
we were told. That's what we were
Yeah.
told as kids. So, like for you, I don't know what your town is called, but maybe some people be like, "I can't wait to get to Dublin. I got to get to Dublin, or I got to get to London." Or some people want to go to London, or they just want to get to the big city. That's like always. And I think growing up in Washington, Washington was like a backwater. There was no scene that we were aware of here, local music scene at all, in the late '60s and early '70s. Now that I'm older and I've met people, I know now that there were some bands, but they were mostly bands who were trying to like get up enough momentum to move to New York because that's where the industry lives. But the thing about punk was punk didn't care about the industry. Punk made its own industry wherever it was. That's what was interesting to me. So when people kept saying, well, you got to move to New York if you want to be in a punk band, or you have to move to New York to be a punk. I was like, well, I'm first off, I'm in high school and I'm not moving anywhere. Second off, that's crazy. Why would I move? Like, why would creativity or frustration or passion or um, boredom? Those are not terms. Those things, the sort of cocktail of ingredients that could lead to the punk creative that creation of a punk thing, that doesn't only live in New York. That can be anywhere. So why do I have to go to New York to find that? I got it right here. So instead of going to New York, how about starting something right here in our own town so that we can have our own scene? We don't need to follow the industry. We make our own industry.
That's very interesting. And also, it inspired a lot of people now and in the past from what you did in Washington. So you started off with the Teen Idols, which formed into Minor Threat, but we will discuss that later. What I wanted to ask you about is you mentioned there that you started off making your own foundation in Washington, in your hometown. But how did it actually start?
We wrote a
How
song. We just wrote it. We formed a band. We wrote a song. We met each other. We found each other. We just started hanging out. We didn't care what other people thought. Like people would say, your band's terrible. Okay, we like it. So we don't care what you think. We're just going to play music. It didn't matter because we weren't trying to make money. We weren't trying to make money. We were trying to sell records. We didn't even have a record. We just wanted to have something to do that we wanted to do. That was it. That was the issue. So like finding friends, like all the early, like for instance, Jeff Nelson, who is a co-owner of Dischord Records, and he was the drummer in the Slinkies, which is our very first band, then the Teen Idols and Minor Threat. Jeff and I met in high school. We were in German class together, and we just became friends. And then we just like let's make music together. We just started working and hanging out, but never in my wildest dreams did I think like, well, someday I'm going to be in bands. I actually thought it would be, I had no idea what I was going to do because I don't really ever think about the future. I still don't think about the future, and I didn't back then. I'm not worried about the future. People say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I don't. I don't see myself in 5 years. I see myself right now. That's where I see myself. And that's basically the case all along. So I think if people are thinking long range, like, well, what's this music going to do? Well, you've already lost. If you're looking that far ahead, you're not looking at the steps in front of you. So for me, that time we just were doing what we were doing at that moment. That seemed like the right thing to do. And we just kept doing that and not worrying about whether it was going to be successful because it already was successful because we were doing it. The moment you pick up and you have a guitarist behind you and a bass, the moment you pick
Yeah.
up an instrument and you strum it, and you go like, oh, that sound, I hear something, and then you start to organize those notes, move your fingers on the key on the fretboard, you start organizing sounds, then you're a fantastic success because you picked up a guitar and you started to make sounds with it that made sense to you. And then you find other people who would join you in this mission. What an incredible success. And then if the 3 or 4 or 5 or however many of you can actually organize your individual sounds into songs, that's a phenomenal success. Unbelievable. And could you play a show? like it'd be a miracle. So I feel like if people would think about successes as daily achievements, they'd be in a much better place. Because I think too often people think, well, I'm terrible, I'm not good at this, we're no good. Okay, well then don't do it then, I guess. But if you want to do it, just do it and don't worry about whether other people think. If you like it, do that, and then you'll find it. So I think for us, it wasn't that we were it wasn't that we know it wasn't that we were thinking like, oh, we want everyone has to recognize what a great scene we are. We just made a scene, and then people can decide for themselves. Do you know who Thurston Moore is?
No, actually, I don't.
He played guitar in his band Sonic Youth, and
Oh, I
they're
know Sonic Youth though.
right.
I do know.
So Thurston asked me to write a poem for a book about. I think it was. I don't know. I think it was about punk. I don't remember. But he said, "Can you just write a poem?" And I was like, I don't usually do things like this, but I like Thurston. So here's my poem about punk. Ready? Here it comes.
Okay, this is gonna be
Because
fun.
we said so.
That's all it was. Because we said, even though it was that oh wow, that's actually brilliant. Just a one-liner. That's amazing.
That's it. That's the yeah.
That's crazy. Just one line, and it actually, do you know what? Even though it is one line, and even after you think about it for a couple of seconds, it does make sense. It does make sense a lot. And then after you finished up with your first two bands, the Slinkies and the Teen Idols, you went on to Minor Threat. And when you started off with Minor Threat, you had already been in two bands. Was there anything that you were going, okay, I have some experience now. What should I do? Was there any kind of ideas that you had in your mind for a new band?
Well, I just wanted to sing. I played bass in the Teen Idols and the Slinkies, but I was writing a lot of the songs and the words and the music. And I had in my head how I thought the song should be sung. And Nathan, who's the singer for the Teen Idols, is a great singer, but it just was different than what I had heard in my own head. So when the Teen Idols stopped playing, I just said to Jeff, I want to sing in the next band because I'm writing the words and I know how I want to hear them. So that was a pretty big shift. That's when I became a singer. And I became a singer.
So,
So those songs like, songs like Straight Edge or Stand Up or, all those songs I wrote, I knew how I wanted them sung. And so then Lyle and Brian, who were also local high school kids. I mean, Brian, when Minor Threat was formed, I think Brian was 15. I was 18. Yeah, I think Brian was 15, 14 or 15. And Lyle would have been 16 or 17. But they're just great, and they're just good players, and they understood. Like I showed them the songs that I'd written, and they could just play them great. If I have recordings of us in 1980, and very early practice. I'd say maybe a month in, if that, and already the songs seem pretty realized. So they knew what they were great players, and I knew how I wanted to sing. I knew what I wanted, how I wanted things to sound. I don't know. I can't explain it. That's what I can tell you.
No. It makes sense. And actually, where we're talking about Minor Threat now, there's some Minor Threat 12 inches behind you. I can see them with all the different colors. That actually looks really cool. I think there's red, gray, green, and blue.
Yeah, we were Jeff and I would put out when we put out record, we do another pressing. We're like, oh, let's change the color. Good. Just thought it was cool.
To be honest, I love album covers myself. I know that sounds weird, but I think just changing the color of the album, I just thought that was always a cool idea.
Yeah.
Now, before, like when I was starting to get into Minor Threat, and Fugazi and stuff, all of those different bands, I was looking at the albums and I always used to get confused. But now, because I know which ones they are, I think it's very cool. And then after Skewbald, Embrace, Minor Threat, and some other bands that you worked with, and sung on, even you were saying there, you moved on to Fugazi. Now, in the middle of when you were playing with Fugazi or when you were writing or anything, was there a point when you went, this is massive?
No, I just do my work. I wasn't thinking, I just write songs. The same way I wrote for the Slinkies or the Teen Idols is what I was writing for Fugazi. I mean, it's hard to, you can't really compare. I mean, obviously when I was in the Slinkies, it was the first band I was ever in. I was learning how to play bass. So then 10 years later, I've been playing music pretty steadily since then. Fugazi played our first show in 1987. So I guess it was 8 years later. And but at that point, I had been playing and I had a much better, I was more experienced. But I think that the motivation for creation was the same for me. It remains the same now. I'm 61, still feels the same to me. But I mean, I have to say that I always thought of popularity as a responsibility. Like I wasn't thinking, oh, we're huge now. We've succeeded, because I think I already told you that we'd been successful since the beginning. So I knew we were successful. That was no question. What it meant, however, is, that, if you're playing shows in someone's basement and now 2,000 people want to see you, you're not going to play in the basement. So you have a responsibility. I don't really care. Honestly, I don't care how many people come see a band I'm in. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that the space in which we're playing makes sense in terms of the amount of people who want to see us. So if 500 people want to see my band, I don't want to play a place that holds 5,000. And if 5,000 people want to see my band, I don't want to play a place that holds 500. So it's just a logistical responsibility. Now, it actually can be kind of aggravating. Like for now, for instance, like if I, especially with the internet and social media now, because that's the communication is so much faster now. So it's hard for me to if I just wanted to try something and play some songs on my own, it'll get picked up and then suddenly, there'll be all these people who come see it. So I didn't have an opportunity to try it out in front of a couple of people because it becomes an event. This band Kariki that I did with Amy, my wife, and Joe Lally from Fugazi. The last record I actually worked on was this Kariki record. But long before the record came out, we decided we'd been practicing for years, playing together and having a really nice time. We said, well, let's do a public practice. So we put out a week ahead of time. We said, you're invited to a public practice with Ian and Joe and Amy. Not even use a band. There's no band name. And it got picked up by blogs and stuff, and 500 people showed up. And it was so that's actually weirdly, I'm not complaining, but it's just a logistical thing that I have to contend with because of the fact that I have I guess I have a legacy, or I have a reputation. So the point being is that you asked, was there a moment like, oh my God, we're massive? I don't think like that. What I think about is if we're going to play a show, what do we need to think about in terms of what's appropriate? What would be safe? You don't want to, there have been some shows I played that were not safe for people. And I'm really careful about that. I don't want to be in a situation where people get hurt or injured or killed. That's unbearable for me. That if you were to create music that becomes an attraction and people come see you, and then because of the setting or something you didn't think about, or because of the behavior of the people in the room, someone was to lose the use of their parts of their body, if they broke their back, or that's happened to us. And Fugazi is historically, not so much now because we haven't played in so long, but people were really critical of us because we would speak out against stage diving and stop people from fighting. But what they didn't really understand was that we had had an experience where people who had come to see us play, fans, were permanently injured. Like they lost the use, they can't walk anymore because they came to see the band because someone jumped on
Mm.
their head. They didn't do anything wrong. Somebody else jumped on their head. And that's a terrible feeling to think that you made something as sacred and as beautiful as music and resulted in a permanent disfigurement of a human being. That's a terrible feeling.
Yeah, actually, that is an amazing point because I know one thing that you've said, and I've seen actually in some of your live concert videos, and I always admired it was if somebody was ever messing, you'd refund their ticket to see you, and you'd
Yeah.
ask for them to leave because
Yeah.
they were
Wow.
hazardous. They could hurt somebody, and I thought that was brilliant.
Or they were
Um,
hurting somebody. Or they
yeah,
were. Yeah.
yeah, that's the other thing. They could have been hurting somebody, but
Yeah.
it's good that you spoke out about it. And now while we're on the topic of concerts, this is a bit of a weird question. You are known for your incredible memory. You remember a lot of things. So you were saying earlier that you played in Ireland. This is a specific concert, so you might not remember it. But my dad was at a concert in the SFX
Uh-huh.
in
I remember
Ireland,
that show. Yeah, with
with
Chumbawamba. It was a
Chumbawamba.
Chumbawamba. Yeah, and it was a
Yeah,
benefit show. It was a benefit for uh uh AIDS. It was a benefit for AIDS or ACT UP Ireland, and we gave away. Remember, we gave away condoms, which was a big, at the time was a big issue because obviously in Ireland at the time in Ireland it was that was sort of I'm not sure what the legality was, but we were giving away condoms and yeah, I remember that show. That was a good show.
yeah. That's all I wanted to know because you remember so many things. Like even when you were speaking again, I'm going to reference the Nardwuar interview that you did, but your Fugazi journal and everything. That was just so cool, and sometimes some parts of it were pretty hard to remember. But from what my dad says, it was the best concert he ever went to because he
I remember it
loves
being a great night.
Fugazi.
I do remember it being a great show. And Chumba at that time, they were, we were quite good friends with them, and still friends. I just haven't seen them, but they were a really brilliant and very political band. It's interesting. They had a huge hit that became sort of anything anybody knows about them. But before that, really, they were a collective, very thoughtful, um, they're artistic geniuses and really thought a lot about presentation, and we're a very radical band, very very interesting band. So playing a show with them, that show was great. They were there. We felt like that band, along with the X from Holland and No Means No from Canada, and there was a number of bands we felt like we were peers with. They were bands that kind of didn't really fit into the general mold of what punk was supposed to be, but in some ways, as a result, were more punk than all the others.
It's just Chumbawamba actually because my dad used to speak about this concert a lot. Not only because Fugazi was there, that was the headline for him. He loves Fugazi still, but he also loves Chumbawamba. Like even you can't see it at the moment, but over there I have a record collection, and one of the records there is Slap by Chumbawamba, and
Huh?
it's probably the most underrated album of all time
Wow.
because, as you were saying, Chumbawamba they're artistic geniuses.
Yeah.
Um, but now, um, before I go on to my final question, about your most recent band, Kuriki, um, you've talked about this a lot, about how because it was during COVID, there's a bit of a lead up to this because you had been playing these songs for a little while. But could you tell you it was a bit of a rocky story because of how the pandemic affected it. Could you tell me and the viewers a little bit about that?
Well, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a rocky story. I think Joe and Amy and I, first off, again, Amy and I have been together for 20 years, and we have a kid. We have a 15-year-old kid, um, and we played the Evens together. Did you listen to the Even stuff?
Oh yeah, the evens are
Yeah.
brilliant.
Right. And then of course Joe was in Fugazi with me for he and I formed the band together before Brendan and Guy were involved, and Joe lived here at Dischord House. This is actually there's a door back there. That was his door. So Joe and I are very, very close. And so the three of us, part of what I was interested, we just wanted to play music. So we just would practice three days a week, just get together in the morning. We practice at 9:30 in the morning. It was great. Just get, our kid would go to school and we just start playing music for an hour or two. And it was great. And then at some point we decided to do shows. We did that public practice, and then we came up with the name Kariki. And we kept just working on these songs we'd written. And eventually we did about 8 or 9 shows. They were good. They were good shows. Just trying to go slow, and didn't let anybody videotape us. That's why you can't find there's nothing on YouTube or anything. We said no cameras. And we never played a venue or club, no clubs, never had advance tickets. And in fact, didn't have tickets. You just pay what you want at the door. That's what we were doing. And so it keeps us way off the map. We're off the radar for most people. But they were nice shows. Unfortunately, we started playing the fall of 2019, and then the very early part of 2020, we did a number of shows, but that's right when the pandemic hit, and it just shut down. We had recorded an album at that point, and it came out in the the summer of 2020. It was initially, the album was supposed to be released March 26th, 2020, which was, just days after the shutdown. And I actually remembered, if you're going to release, if the release date is the 26th, having a record label, that you have to send out records 2 weeks ahead of time, basically, and so that the distributors and stores can get them. So you have that release date on the one day. And we knew that this, the COVID was going around. We understood that was happening. And, but then it started getting kind of creepy, like, uh-oh, this might shut down everything. And we had to make this decision, like, do we ship these records or not? Because suddenly occurred to me that if we ship the records and everything shuts down, then those records, hundreds of records, might just sit in boxes inside of locked stores and may never open again. So we just pulled the plug on the whole. We said, nope, we're just not going to put it out now. And everyone said, we just do mail order, but that's not fair to the stores for us just to do mail order. We felt like the stores more than ever needed to be supported. So we just put the whole release on ice. We didn't release it till, I think, July of 2020. So we gave it like 4 or 5 months. And people seem to like it, but we never played another show. And I've been taking a break because I kind of ran out of ideas for music. We'll see. They'll come back or it won't. We'll find out. I'm a very patient guy. That's my thing. I don't push it. I just think, all right, I'm just gonna, like, when the time is right, we'll make some music, or I'll make some music, or something will happen. But I'm not worried about it. There's plenty to do. Always. There's always something to do that's interesting for me.
That's, well, like, yeah, that's it's a bit of a weird kind of. Was it a bit weird for you then, maybe, when you were releasing the album, kind of changing the dates? Just, weird.
Probably no weirder than it was for you. It's just a change in our schedules, like, actually in some ways, I thought it was quite beautiful. Obviously I'm not talking about illness and death, but
yeah,
you think about the way societies work. There was this moment where suddenly, if you think of sort of like you're standing in a field, this is life, like you're standing in an open field, but you have these screens pulled down. So you look over here and you see like concerts, and over here you see movies and television and sports and this other screen and all this stuff. And then suddenly all those screens just roll up. And you're like, oh, it's just a giant empty field. That's all life is, an empty field. And so how we navigate that field is really, that's on us. That's what we got to figure out. So there's some aspects of the shift in society without all the diversions removed, that people really had to think about their own, like who they were and what their lives were. It was very, very interesting time. I mean, I know that it was upsetting for people, and I understand, obviously, again, it's absolutely tragic, the 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 loss of life and the terrible illnesses that occurred. So I'm not making light of that whatsoever. However, there is an aspect of it, uh, which is, you know, there's a good chance that in your lifetime you'll never see anything like that again. Um, uh, so it was a rare opportunity to experience something that is really, the world has changed. And then, now look how easily people fall back into just back to normal, right? Everyone's like, we're just back to, everything's back kind of to some degree. So I think that for me, I'm interested in creative response. So whatever the circumstances are, I try to come up with what I think is the most creative way to respond to that circumstance. So in that year in 2020, circumstances around us changed. So how do we proceed thoughtfully? So obviously people say, well, yeah, you could just do a digital release or you could just do a mail order. But then I thought, yeah, but the stores, they're really getting screwed right now. Let's wait and see if there's a way for them, they can start selling records. And then let's make sure stores have these records so they have a reason for people to actually buy the records from them. Let's support them. That to me is just creative response. Now, in terms of not playing a show for 3 years or 4 years, or it's been now, or 3 years, I guess 3 years. Yeah, that I don't know what would happen. I have no idea. I imagine had COVID not interrupted the band, we would have continued to play. But I don't know. I just don't. That's hypothetical.
That makes complete sense. But I wanted to ask, because honestly, I'm interested about this. It's not a question about your life or anything, but as a final question, I want to ask, should the listeners expect anything new from Dischord or yourself in the next while?
I mean, Dischord puts out records, so yes, And for me, I don't know. We'll see. It's really, I have to say, we're a really unusual company. Like you have to know that Dischord, which is in December, will be 43 years. Never used a contract. Never had a lawyer. Don't have managers. Like we don't work with agents. We're not involved with the music business whatsoever. We're just weirdos. And it just goes on, the longevity of the label. I think it's just because it's just something interesting for us. We just want to do things in a way that seems sensible and human. So yes, we'll put out, I imagine, we have a screen record coming out in a couple of weeks. But there's always more releases coming. I mean, literally have thousands and thousands of recordings. So we'll just keep on doing so. If people are interested, like we don't care. Like most labels, I think when they form, they try to, at first, I think they just want to put their friends' records, but then they start like, well, now we want to be a business. So then they start to grow their business, and maybe they get a record that does really well. So they're like, well, now we're going to buy a building, or we're going to, they expand, because there's an American business notion, which is you have to always expand, get bigger and bigger and bigger. But that is not the way we operated. Even though we were selling many, many, many records in the 90s, we never bought a building. We didn't expand. We just thought, well, that's for now, but we'll see what happens in the future. We don't know. It doesn't matter to us it doesn't matter to me if I sell 1,000 records or 10,000 records or 100,000 records. I don't really care as long as we're not losing money. That's it, And the reason that I don't want to lose money is that maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I was thinking about Dischord, and I've been doing it for a long time. And I thought, getting kind of like, I'm just going to keep doing this. sort of kind of whatever. And then I thought, wait a minute, my life is very unusual. I've never really had a boss or anything like that. I live a really unusual life, and it's partially I owe it to all these musicians who were in these bands that entrusted me with their music. And now that, things are longer in the tooth, meaning older, for instance, when we put out our first record, 43 years before that, World War II hadn't started. So now, in 2023, we're talking about something that happened 43 years ago, Teen Idles, Minor Threat. So you can see it is really, I'm not going to call it ancient history, but it's actually, it's a half a century ago practically. So it makes sense to me that there will be diminishing interest. It seems totally logical. However, if that's the case, I now have a custodial responsibility. And what I mean by that is that these people have entrusted me and Jeff and the label with their music. And for all these years, with there's no contract, nothing. They've just trusted us, and we paid them, and we have this good arrangement. And now that things are sort of starting to diminish, now I have to really make sure that the label, as long as there are people in the world who are interested in hearing this music, I feel like I have a responsibility to make it available to them in one format or another. It doesn't really matter to me what the format is. And so as a result, I feel like I have to make decisions that are not going to squander the label. I'm not going to speculate on some record. Well, maybe we're going to put a bunch of money into this one record, and maybe this will be the thing that's going to sell well. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take any risks. I'm going to sell things. I'm going to sell smaller quantities. I'm not going to lose money. That's the thing. I'm not going to lose money. At some point, I'm assuming the label will continue to winnow down, and eventually it'll probably just be me doing some mail order, but we'll see. I don't know. I mean, it's crazy to me. It's crazy to me to think about the fact that the label has lasted this long and that it still feels relevant to me. But it's what I do.
That is incredible. You've answered that question perfectly, along with all the others that I've got down here.
Right.
But thank you so much, Ian, for joining me. It's been so brilliant to talk to you. You're a personal hero of mine.
I appreciate your kind words, and I hope you'll give your father my regards and tell him thanks for coming to the gig.
Thanks, Ian.
Great to talk to you. Later.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Logan Sounds Off. You can follow me on X, Facebook, and Instagram at Logan Sounds Off. And don't forget to subscribe and not miss any more cool episodes. Bye, guys!